Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to AI Sprints, episode 3. It's wonderful to have you with us wherever you're joining us from in the world. We're going to be chatting about AI in a fast-paced, energetic way, as the last 2 episodes have been, set the tone. And thank you so much to the guests and the audiences. So many of you have reached out and sort of said to us, oh, this is amazing. When is there going to be a season 2? We've had speakers kind of approach us and ask us about the next season as well. So really excited that we are continuing this momentum. We've got 2 wonderful guests today. So AI, as you know, it's a technology that has a divided soul. We tend to view it in terms of what it offers us as a teacher, as a leader, what it can take away also in terms of some of the sort of fatalistic sides. So we're going to get right into that with our 2 amazing guests today. So I'd like to welcome today to AI Sprints episode 3, John, who is the CEO of TeachMate AI, and we've got an exciting demo of that product later on in this session, so don't go anywhere, and Laura Knight as well. And just a little bit of background about our 2 guests today. We'll go for Laura first. So Laura Knight is a founder of Sapio Limited, and it specializes in digital strategy and innovation. With over 2 decades of teaching experience, she excels in strategic technology development for teaching and learning, AI, digital skills training. Laura empowers many leaders in schools, universities, and commercial organizations, leveraging technology to transform outcomes in systems and teams. Her book, The Little Guide for Teachers on Generative AI, is out now. I have it here. It is absolutely brilliant. And as you can see from my copy, it is well thumbed, Laura. And I have been using this in training with many teachers. So that we'll talk about that today. That's going to be part of the focus. So welcome, Laura. Absolutely chuffed to have you here. I'm a big fan of your work. Always when you post on platforms like LinkedIn, I'm always reading, always engaged. And I think you've got real authority in this space. So it's an absolute privilege to have you here today. Thanks for joining us. Dr. John, yeah, thank you so much. Dr. John Chippenall signs his emails as Chip. Is a co-founder of CEO of TeachMate, has got a long decorated history actually in computing and engineering. And actually, John, I didn't realize that you had a PhD for aerospace, aeronautical, astronomical, can you say it? What's the PhD in?
It was actually experimental aerodynamics, early drones. Yeah.
Wow.
And it was when I was doing that, I decided I wanted to be a primary school teacher actually. So
of course, like you do, we've got a teacher crisis for shortages, but you know, there's people jumping in from STEM. Love that. And obviously you've been a school teacher as well. You've been a senior leader in and around Manchester. You did a PGC in computing, so you've got a computer science background, and that kind of led you on a journey to writing several books. And eventually, through being a director of computing schools, you kind of segued into starting TeachMate AI. And we're going to find a little bit more out about that platform today when you give us a demo. And what I think is great about you being here as well, John, is the fact that you can give us teachers a bit of an industry insight into what you're thinking about when you think about these technologies, when you're building product for teachers and for students. So I think that's a really exclusive insight. And TeachMate AI is our sponsor for today. So welcome to both of you. So we're going to dive straight in with a juicy question. And I'm going to go to Laura for this first. And then John, feel free to chip in as well. Chip in. Did you like that pun? That was a good one, wasn't it?
I like it.
So,
I like it.
Laura, you've used the phrase that I've fallen in love with, and I think it should be copyrighted by you. It's called thinking with care. And I find myself quoting this to people all the time because I think it encapsulates what we should be encouraging children, young people to do with technology. So on that note, what is your take? You know, talk us through the phrase. What does it mean to think with care when it comes to AI?
Thank you. And I'm so pleased that we're starting with this because I think it sets a really interesting intention for our exploration today. I like to escape from the reductive boundaries of the extremes, if you like. There is a lot more to thinking about technology than just the doom and gloom at one end and then the blind, naive evangelists at the other. And instead, we need to take this much more nuanced position in the middle where we can see both the pros and the cons, we can see the risks, we can see the opportunities, we can see the challenges. There's so much richness there. So my approach about thinking with care is really about taking a moment to consider, to reflect on consequences, to think about agendas, to really investigate rather than to just leap. And in a space where technology so often wants to have us move fast and break things, it's actually instead about just taking a moment to really think about our values, think about what we're trying to achieve, and move forwards with purpose and intention.
Fantastic. Love that. And John, what does it mean to you? What does the phrase thinking with care mean to you?
Yeah, well, I think from my perspective from that, I mean, I completely agree with everything that Laura said there. And I think that from my position where we are now, what's really important is that we've got a really strong communication to our community of teachers that are using the platform and looking at how they're using it in their schools and how they're reflecting on their use and communicating kind of best practice messages on how to kind of get the most out of the technology. So yeah, I think there's this often in education we get this kind of these false dichotomies opening up from one extreme to the other, and I think it's absolutely right. It's not necessarily quite as exhilarating to say it, but it's somewhere in the middle ground, which is the sweet spot which we should be aiming for.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And welcome to everyone that's just joined us. I noticed that the chat's blowing up. There's people joining left, right and centre. So it's lovely to have you all here. Just to say, this episode will be recorded and it will live on the STEM Learning community. So you'll be able to watch it post-event, a little bit like an on-demand Netflix show. And actually, we've had huge engagement with people going back and saying that it's been really useful for their CPD. So if something got said today and you miss it, don't stress, you can catch back afterwards. And teachers that's out there, you need to write down, think with care. That's such a great phrase if you missed that opener. So thank you for that. So John, we're going to dive into kind of your platform, TeachMate AI, and look kind of as you as a developer of AI content for students and for teachers. When you design these platforms, how do you and the team place the child at the heart of the process?
Yeah, so I mean, the vast majority, nearly all of the TeachMate team are either current teachers, part-time teachers, or ex-teachers that have recently left the classroom. So I think placing the kind of the student, the child at the heart of things is in our blood, really. You know, that's what we've all been doing for, decade plus in our previous careers. Our mission is about lightening teachers' workload and enabling them to better personalize learning for students. And that's where we want the impact. But the two kind of, they go hand in hand. To provide a better teaching learning experience for pupils, we want to provide them kind of more personalized resources. But I feel that the system for a long time has kind of traded on the guilt of teachers to keep working later and later to make this resource, adapt that resource. You get to 8 o'clock in the evening, you've planned your lesson, you've made some resources, you think that I should really adapt this for that child or create a word map for that child, and you keep working. And that's why we've ended up in this situation, with a workload and retention kind of crisis in education. So leveraging AI, we can speed up that process. Well, first of all, we can lighten teachers' workload with the admin to take that away a bit so they can focus back on what really matters, and it's going to have a stronger impact on the pupil. And then we can speed up the rate at which we can provide for different pupils, particularly those with potentially additional needs, and personalize the learning for them. So the pupils being at the heart of everything that we're doing is really kind of our mission in all of this.
Fantastic. And so true as well. We spoke with Darren and Priya Lakhani a couple of months back now, actually, about exactly the same thing, just reminding us that children sit at the heart of the learning process, and that a lot of noise in AI is about the adults and what we can do as adults, but actually there's these children in schools kind of looking on at this technology, and they're making their own relationships and their own decisions about it. So it's really good and reassuring to hear that those thought processes go into when you're developing the models. So Laura, going back to your book, and if you've just joined us, just a massive shout out to this incredible book. It's called Generative AI in the Classroom. We'll be putting links to this in the chat feed, and you can order yourself a copy. I accidentally ordered 2 copies, but I gave one away and I kept the other. It's absolutely packed with absolute nuggets, and it kind of sits in the same series as Amjad Ali's and Benny Kara's books, The Little Guides, published by Corwin as well. So fantastic thing to go and get a copy of. And it's reasonably priced as well, teachers, which is always a bonus. I'm not on commission at all. I just think it's a really good book. And what I'd like to do here, Laura, is just explore some of these jargonistic terms that get thrown around in AI, starting with generative AI. Take that one away, and then maybe walk us through a few others that you run into quite often.
Yeah, sure, no problem at all. Well, let's start by understanding, first of all, that the term artificial intelligence is an umbrella term for a whole cluster of different technologies, many of which have been in our lives and embedded in our daily practices for a really long time. And lots of folks forget that that's the case. So if we talk about Siri and Alexa, if we talk about using mapping software and avoiding traffic jams, if we think about the fact that we don't experience fraud from our credit card, it's thanks to those kinds of narrow AI technologies that that help us in our everyday. But because they're so far embedded, people sort of have imagined that AI is very new, even though it's a concept that first started being talked about in the 1950s. What's been really interesting, though, is this evolution into a new stage of AI's development in the last few years, which is this idea of generative AI, which is AI that instead of just doing a single job, can actually produce content in a more active way. Now, it's an illusion to some extent because we have to be a little bit careful. Our human tendency when we see something we don't fully understand is to think that it's magical, and that isn't necessarily the case at all. Instead, this is a really big statistical machine that has gathered up so much information from essentially hoovering up data from the web that it can then make a really good prediction based on what's coming next in all sorts of different contexts. So that generative capacity is basically about high quality predictions. Now, there's been a certain amount of, I'm going to use the magical metaphor again, of witchcraft and wizardry about this, and some gatekeeping as well, let's be honest, where people have quite enjoyed implying that it's really very difficult to get it to work. But you know what's wonderful is that this is a very democratic technology, and you get out what you put in. So folks who take a little time to understand and learn how to use this technology, how to prompt it well, and understand that it's not just a search engine, but something far more, can really get great results from it. Now, there isn't a great kind of masterful ninja science behind that, but there are some strategies and techniques that we can use, and that's often called prompt engineering or something similar. But we shouldn't be intimidated by that in the first instance, for sure.
Amazing. And just, we've got a real plethora of experiences of AI here today, Laura, and John as well, from people that have probably not even turned on a large language model or probably know what an LLM is, all the way through to consultants in AI like yourselves who are really pioneering. So can one of you just explain to the audience what a prompt is for those that don't know it, and perhaps demystify what a large language model is and the different types? I think that would be really useful for people.
John, do you want to take that?
Yeah, happy to. So a prompt is essentially sort of set of instructions that you put into a large language model to get an output out. And you write these in natural language. You know, you can tell it to do things, you know, write me a lesson plan. The difference when you come into when you get into prompt engineering, though, is recognizing that there is a strong correlation between the prompt in and the output that you get out. So if you write a really short prompt and just say something like write me a lesson plan, the output that you'll get out will be very different and probably not as good a quality if you develop an extensive prompt that will set out exactly perhaps a structure that you require, give the AI guidance on what you might want it to align with, and also perhaps guide it on the structure of the outcome, where sometimes you want it to put things in tables, etc. So there's a kind of art and science to understanding how to prompt. And that changes with time as well. So, you know, as the AI models, so as the creators of the base large language models like OpenAI release new models, you find that there's sort of a certain nuance to the way prompting to get the best results out of different models. So it does change a bit over time.
We can imagine, can't we, John, that the large language model is a bit like a kind of ecosystem, or even a bit like an AI operating system almost, isn't it? If people can imagine that experience. And so it has a set of data and language of its own, and you're going to have different experiences according to which one you use, right? So there isn't just one. People sometimes assume that they've heard of ChatGPT and assume that that's the one tool to rule them all, but actually there are many different models, but there are also models built on other tools, and so you might well find you're using something that is foundationally based on something else.
Yeah, fascinating. And just in your experience, guys, going out and about in the UK at least, what models are most prevalent? Obviously, everyone speaks about OpenAI's ChatGPT. Are you seeing teachers engaging with Gemini, Claude? Like, where's the smattering of kind of interest, would you say?
I mean, predominantly I hear ChatGPT, or sometimes a bit of a random combination of the letters at the end, because it's sort of can be pronounced differently sometimes.
Yeah, great.
Claude as well. I hear more and more. I was just going to go back. One point to add previously. When with prompt engineering, what is interesting, I think, is that some of the kind of skills that we've been developing in pupils over the last kind of decade with our new computing curriculum around computational thinking, designed to help them write code. I kind of see prompting a little bit as like code with the ability for it to infer kind of what you mean. But there's a lot of, so there's a lot of the computational thinking skills which really help you to be a good kind of prompt engineer, like decomposing down what you want it to do, thinking of a bit of a chain of thought, an algorithm through, and breaking it down. So for people that are just sort of starting to tinker and explore with a bit of prompt engineering, pulling out some of the computational thinking resources that are around and looking at how that kind of guides your thinking can be really useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
And there are other models as well, and I think it's worth exploring those with an open mind, because you will get different experiences and there are different strengths. There will be lots of schools, for example, who are committed to a particular pathway. Maybe those schools who use Microsoft will want to stay in the Microsoft ecosystem. The same with those schools who are using Google Classroom and want to stay with Gemini. And so there is going to be a question around friction, around like what's the most sensible kind of path of least resistance for you. But I certainly think too, it's worth exploring some of the tools which are specialist in particular areas. And especially, for example, if you wanted to do some work in the creative arts, if you're interested in visuals and sort of photography style outputs or musical outputs, there are going to be tools that are specifically designed for that. So it isn't always helpful to imagine that one tool will do everything. Instead, I would recommend that you consider your AI toolkit a little bit like a coral reef, where you have multiple different things that coexist well together, and you might even use them in combination for different tasks, essentially.
I love how we end up as teachers and leaders always wrapping AI up in metaphor. We can't resist it, can we? It's fantastic.
Absolutely.
But it's to domesticate it and kind of give it meaning is really fascinating. Okay, really good. Just quickly before we move on to the next question, just a thought I had, just some background on Claude, I guess, and these other things like DeepSeek that have been infiltrating. I get asked a lot, Alex, what do you think about DeepSeek? And Claude's an interesting one, guys, isn't it? Because of where it came from. So essentially, Anthropic owned Claude, and the guy that started Anthropic used to work at OpenAI, and the reason he left that company is he wasn't happy with the direction of travel. It was too progressive, and he has quite a cautious approach. So I'm finding myself as a personal user navigating back towards Claude more than ever now, because I really like the language output it gives me. And it's also allegedly better for coding as well. But then you've also got this Chinese model, DeepSeek, that kind of came in a few months ago and it crashed the stock market overnight. It's fascinating. What would you say to teachers about the cautions with these certain models?
So I have some opinions on this, and feel free to add your thoughts as well, John. But I certainly think our first reflex when we are thinking about this from this perspective of the institution and the school is to look at what your policy says, and we'll talk more about policy later today. But we need to be really careful, and we're back to thinking with care, specifically about data. If you're asking your generative AI tools for recipes for chocolate cake, it's not going to be a massive issue. But the minute that we start thinking about data privacy for our students and our colleagues and the IP of our institutions, we need to be very careful about what we're putting into these models, especially on free accounts. If the account is free, then you are the product, friends. So let's make sure that we're thinking about what is it that we're sharing and how have we set up our security parameters and our preferences in the settings to ensure that we're protecting the privacy of ourselves and the people we're working with. I do think also there is then a question about how long that data stays sticking around and where it is housed. Should we be specifically suspicious about Chinese-based tools, for example? I don't think we should take a blanket approach to things coming from a particular geography. I don't think that's helpful. And I think it probably leans too much on a kind of unhelpfully blind xenophobia. Instead, though, we should be looking at regulatory differences between different geographies. The EU, the UK, the US, and other parts of the world all have different approaches to these things. And it is increasingly becoming our responsibilities as individuals and working in schools to actually notice this. Even though for a whole generation, we have delightfully ignored the tiny print in the terms and conditions.
Fascinating. And actually, Laura, this is a really contentious topic when we do the Unlocking AI course at STEM Learning, which is happening tonight after this, actually, the third cohort. We really get into the nitty gritty of this. And there's so many different opinions based on context, sometimes religious beliefs. It's a really fascinating, quite deep topic. And we could almost spend a whole hour just talking about that. John, did you want to come in with anything there? Or I've got another question for you, if not.
Yeah, no, I mean, just to say, totally agree with all of that. And even with some of the more well-known companies and models, we still need to do those checks and balances. And as you pointed out, if it's free, you're paying for it with your data. So just be aware of that. Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah. Fantastic. And loads of great stuff in the chat. Please, people, use it as a way to communicate with our guests and with each other. Often we find in the chat that people put absolute nuggets of gold in there that other people can learn from. Particularly, I saw David Curran drop into the thing in a minute. People like that, please, please, please share good practice, because it's such a good network for kind of bouncing ideas off each other. So we appreciate that. And shortly, we're going to have a demonstration from John. He's recorded as a fantastic demo that we're going to do in just a moment. But before we get there, John, I want to explore your platform and how developers of AI products are thinking about students that have SEND. So maybe in my school, I have children with dyslexia. Maybe it's sensory needs. How, when you build these platforms, are you and your engineers thinking about every child within a school ecosystem?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to pick up a little bit from sort of where I left off in one of the earlier questions, talking about the capacity for this technology to kind of personalize learning, because actually I think that pupils in schools with additional needs are a group that could really be positively impacted by AI technology kind of being used more in schools. You know, because of the fact that you know, it might be that class teachers or schools want to try and provide for that need through resource, through adaptation of materials, etc. And the technologies, you know, making that more doable. I mean, just to provide some kind of concrete examples, you know, things like, and I think, Laura, I'm pinching ideas from your book. My copy's just over the back of the computer, so I should grab it in a second as well. But I mean, so ideas that you've identified and things that we've got on TeachMate as well. Being able to instantly adapt texts, you know, simplifying texts, you know, that's just something that we couldn't have previously done without sitting down and rewriting it. We can do it just like that now. And it means that you can adapt a resource so that a pupil who might not be as confident reader can still be engaging in the same context, the same content, but just adapted to them. I did an onboarding session for a school earlier this week, and the teacher was telling me that she works with a pupil with additional needs, which is absolutely obsessed with Hey Doggy. I don't know if you know Hey Doggy. I've got a 4-year-old and 1-year-old, yeah. So it is great, actually. Hey Doggy is one of the better ones. But she spends a lot of her time like just trying to adapt resources, put it into a bit of a context to help engage their learning. I showed them how you could do that in sort of seconds, and it was just fantastic. You know, like a light bulb moment for her, because that's going to help her working with those pupils. So going back to that first point, you know, the impact is on the pupils by supporting the teachers to have that kind of impact on the pupils. And then on the kind of more on this sort of administrative side and sort of professional colleague side, you know, you can have tools where if you take a class and you've got pupils with, you know, additional needs that you haven't worked with before, you can bounce around ideas for strategies, you know, start to educate yourself, use that alongside speaking to your colleagues in school, not instead of, but alongside speaking to their previous class teacher. So I actually think, you know, that this is a group, a sort of subgroup of pupils that can be really supported through AI technology. I don't know whether you want to say anything, Laura.
I'd love to dive in a little bit and build on that, John, because I totally agree with you. And I think one of the tricks that we're missing in schools is actually really empowering our teaching assistants and those kinds of roles where people are working one-to-one, for example, with pupils, or supporting them in small groups and helping them, essentially helping those colleagues to elevate the experience for youngsters. And that might be about reducing frustration. My cat's decided now's the moment, helpful. Reducing frustration, or that kind of giving up moment that sometimes can be really problematic, but also about creating scaffolded journeys for youngsters so that you can reduce things into much smaller chunks of learning rather than bigger leaps for other students in the class. I think one of the things I also love to remind folks of is it's very rarely the case that staff have got nothing at all. They may well have a worksheet, a document, a presentation, a resource, but it's just not quite right. And I think we miss a trick too if we don't recognize the value of using generative AI to just improve it. That 10, 15, 20% improvement can be absolutely transformational. And particularly when we're thinking about taking something that's a little on the dry and boring side, not that we'd ever admit it, of course, but If things are just a little on the dry and boring side, whether it's making it sort of, reference a cartoon, whether it's tailoring something to individual or age appropriate interests, or whether it's gamifying the resource so that you're actually incentivizing participation at every level, there is such opportunity here to boost engagement. And I know that engagement gets quite a lot of bad press, but particularly when we're thinking about students with additional needs, without engagement, there's nothing else. So let's really think about how we can find ways into learning that support the youngsters.
Yeah, amazing insights.
Sorry, I was just going to say, does it get a bad press, engagement? I mean, you need your learners engaged, don't you?
I think that there are some folks who will say that engagement is a poor proxy for X, Y, Z, right? So and there was certainly when I was doing my training 20 odd years ago, there was quite a lot of guitar playing and kind of jazz hands rather than focusing in on the actual instruction. So everything in moderation.
So we're back to the false dichotomy. At the one side, lots of jazz hands and guitars with no real substance. At the other, and the sweet spot is in the middle. But I think engagement is the important part of that equation.
Totally.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. I want to pick up very quickly and just segue to a couple of things that have been trending in the chat feed whilst we've been chatting. So first of all, Notebook LM has been mentioned, and as a way to kind of get children using voice. Just to kind of touch on that quickly, because obviously as a platform, it's wonderful for teachers to use and play the recording, but we shouldn't be endorsing kids to use it themselves because of the age restriction on that. So that's just a point. But there is a real rich learning opportunity there, isn't there, for children who potentially struggle with writing to be able to access media and content in a different way by listening to podcasts.
Yes. But we also want to remember that we don't want to overload them with just endless dross, AI slop they call it, don't they, where you have lots and lots of content that doesn't actually add any value. More isn't always better, I think, would be my caution on that. But yes, creating things in different modalities, supporting students, for example, with accompanied reading, for example, things that are read aloud at the same time, generating other ways of engaging with content. Love it.
Yeah, fantastic. And the other thing that's been talked about in the chat feed is that these LLMs, these large language models, have different personalities. And actually, ironically, we were just chatting about this before we came on air, weren't we, guys? And we were saying that last week, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, announced a new phrase called glazing. So we weren't sure what it was, and we were chatting about it. And essentially, it means that his latest ChatGPT model has been overly friendly and overly positive, glossing up people, saying, oh, this works fantastic, when probably it's really average. And what can that personality of that particular large language model, how could that be quite dangerous to kids? Could it sort of overpraise their work? So I don't know the answer on that. It's just an interesting term to have on your radar. So if you take nothing more away from today, there's one for you, glazing.
For sure.
And it's an interesting one.
Take it away to go and have a chat with GPT because it's particularly nice at the moment. That might take in the future, but if you want a bit of something, now's your time.
It is the time, and there's some funny stuff trending out there on that. Just before we go into a demo, I just want to I want to look at this idea of augmented ideation in your book. Just for those that joined us late, I know I've said it again. Here's the book, fantastic, well worth a read. Get a copy. But you've come up with this idea of augmented ideation. I have never heard that phrase until I read your book, Laura. I kind of know what it is now, but I'm fascinated to learn a bit more about it, as I'm sure many teachers are, because we're starting to use images on these large language models, particularly at primary, I'm finding, to stimulate creativity, discussion, and creative writing. So give us, enlighten us.
So what I'm interested in here is creating opportunities for both for teachers and for students to remove the fear of the blank page and to create more ways to engage with a concept, a construct, a new piece of learning, for example. And I particularly think we can lean on some of those ideas around dual coding in this space as well, and how important it is to engage those visual aspects of the brain as well as looking at text as well. But certainly when we're thinking about augmented ideation, I think we have to think about it as a journey. So this is a way that we can use AI as kind of critical friend and mentor and coach, but also as a way to spark abundance. One of the things that's tricky when we're thinking about new ideas for something, whether we're brainstorming a project or planning an essay, is that we can kind of get stuck in a rut or go down a very single sort of narrow path. And actually, an abundance of choice and helping think critically about a multitude of options can be a really healthy way to gain perspective, shift lenses, and reflect differently on our approach to content. So actually, I don't see that as cheating unless it's contextually valid to do so. But in lots of ways, it really helps us to hone in on our ideas and develop them with more agility rather than just leaping on the first thing and hoping for the best.
Yeah, I love the way you articulate around AI, Laura. It's so clear. And
Yeah,
for a teacher, it's impressive.
This is what happens
yeah.
when like a hyperlexic autistic kid grows up. This is what you get.
Yeah,
but it's just so interesting just to listen to. So thank you for that insight. And we're gonna segue into Tim. If you want to tee up the TeachMate demo, we've got a 4.5-minute demo for you now. Please stick around to the end of this demo, because when we come back, we are going to get into the fatalistic side of AI. We're going to be talking about some pretty heavy stuff that not a lot of people, I think, have the courage to speak about or the experience to find information out about when it comes to AI. So it's going to go to some dark places potentially. But before we do that, at the end of this video, John has been kind enough to share a free trial of his platform, TeachMate AI. I use this platform. I use many different platforms. And I would recommend teachers out there to have a play with this if you're not familiar with the platform. Hit play, Tim, when you're ready.
Okay, welcome to a short demo of TeachMate. Now, obviously, I'm not going to be able to show you everything we do in just a few minutes, but hopefully what I can show you is just how easy TeachMate is to use and how it supports our community, which we're incredibly proud of. So you can see here that the platform's made up of over 130 AI tools designed to help teachers reduce their workload and personalise learning for students. So let's start a bit of a demo here by getting it to plan or create a medium-term plan for my Year 3 Rocks unit. Now, all of our tools are built via collaborations between teachers and tech experts, and we use a variety of technical processes to check and ensure high quality outputs from our AI. So full disclosure here, I'm speeding this up, let's go. But our tools generally take about 20 to 30 seconds to respond. Okay, so now we've got our medium-term plan. Let me show you how our linked tool feature allows me to extract the individual learning objectives and pass those over to our lesson planning tool. And we pass the contextual information in the background to really streamline the process for teachers using these AI tools to support them in their planning. Now, whilst that's being generated, let me just come back to medium-term plan and show you a couple of important features. First of all of our tools return in this online editor because we encourage teachers to use this as a first draft, jump in, use their own professional judgment and continue to make edits and tweaks. Likewise, you can do that with the refinement bar, which I'll come back to in a second. Right, we've now got our draft of our lesson plan, which we're going to jump in and edit and tweak until we're happy with. Let's make some slides now to go with it with another one of our linked tools. Now, our slideshow generator has had a revamp recently, so you can see I can select what I want to appear on the slide, such as prior knowledge questions or key vocabulary. I've selected them all. So let's get these generated, and here we go. We've got a draft set of slides to go along with the lesson plan, and in the background all the contextual information from those different AI tools are being passed along, so everything links up. Let me now demo the refinement bar, which allows you to iterate with the AI, encouraging that teacher professional input. So I might look at these slides and decide I want a slide on plant fossils, so I can request that, which is added now for me. But just as easily I can request the content to be made more or less challenging, or translated even into a different language. Okay, let's demo a final linked tool here and generate an assessment quiz, a multiple choice quiz, linking directly to all of the content in the planning that we've created. So our quiz tool here creates a multiple choice quiz, which is fully editable. You can change which is the right answer, you can add additional questions, you can add your own questions in, again encouraging that teacher professional input. And then when you're happy with it, you can export it to the popular quizzing platforms, or you can just go old school and get a Word version. Now, so far I've only shown you 4 tools from our planning collection, but we actually provide support to teachers right across all aspects of their working day, whether it's creating resources here or it's using tools to adapt those resources to specific people's needs, doing admin tasks or writing pupil reports. And we've got a comprehensive set of tools for school leaders, which we're currently developing further via collaboration with a range of school leaders from around the country. And talking to school leaders, our data dashboard provides aggregated insight into the use of the platform by teachers to support with the professional development planning to maximise impact for schools. So I'm going to finish by talking very briefly about our community programmes and use this as an opportunity to give our community a bit of a shout out. So to all of our ambassadors and anyone that's become a certified educator, thank you. Thanks to everyone that comes along to our weekly webinars or as part of our Facebook group. We're now up to over 16,000 teachers sharing tips on using the platform. And thanks to everyone that's contributed to the resources we've developed as well. So I hope that's been a useful quick demo. I should add that obviously TeachMate is GDPR compliant, no data is used to train models, and we adhere to the DFE's generative AI safety guidelines for teacher-facing platforms. So if you'd like a completely free trial of TeachMate for your school, just ping us an email on team@teachmate.com and you'll get through to our wonderful Mel, who will sort that for you. Thanks so much.
Tim, if you just, okay, I was going to say leave that email up, but we'll pop it in the chat. Welcome back, everyone, to episode 3 of AI Sprints. It's been a really engaging conversation so far. We've touched and scratched the surface of many ideas, but now we're going to dive into the deeper, darker side of AI that many of us as teachers and educators, particularly if we've got a safeguarding responsibility in school, worry about. And I get asked a lot of these questions quite often, sort of, Alex, how can we make sure that these platforms are GDPR compliant? How can we make sure that we're keeping our children safe? And in some institutions, they are just banning AI blanket just to kind of get around this because it's such a heavy thing and they don't necessarily have the expertise to navigate this territory. So we're going to look at AI ethics, safety and safeguarding in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to start with you, Laura, because I feel this is a real strength of yours, and some of the things that you've written and posted on this and spoken about really speaks to this idea of thinking with care. So just to extend that a little bit, let's explore 2 phrases, if you like, that you use in the book. There's intellectual offloading and blind reliance. Can you just walk us through what they are?
Absolutely. So let's start with intellectual offloading. Human beings fundamentally are wondrous, creative, curious creatures in so many ways, but also we are quite lazy, I think, if we're honest with ourselves, right? And so one of the things that is tricky to manage in this particular space is that AI offers us an opportunity to perhaps not have to work as hard as we might have had to do without it. Now, that can lead to all sorts of wonderful efficiencies for sure, but there is also the temptation to allow AI to do the heavy lifting for us and to offload responsibility for decision making, for engaging with a topic, for thinking properly and deeply about it, and instead let AI make it look like we've done it instead. And that for me feels problematic, not least because it's disingenuous and we're implying that we have done the work when that isn't necessarily the case, but also because AI does not have the capacity to make decisions for humans and shouldn't be allowed to. Like that's a fundamental problem. It's a problem in even written into legislation. So when we're thinking about how we engage with AI, we need to make sure that we stay in control. We talk a lot about the human in the loop, and I would go as far to say as I don't think it's enough to say human in the loop, actually. I think that it has to be even more pronounced than that, and that we need to make sure that humans are still in control and not allowing the AI to go further than it should. The second piece was around, so we had intellectual offloading. When the second one, what was that? It was about blind reliance, wasn't it? So blind reliance blind reliance is when we just assume that AI knows best and we trust everything that comes out. Now, not only can AI do that kind of glazing approach and blind us with flattery and tell us how amazing we are, but also it talks with such confidence. There is never any doubt. And there's a whole academic study. You can go and look at what's happening in the AI team at King's College London, for example, about the lack of uncertainty in the AI space and how uncertainty is almost programmed out of it. This is particularly interesting when we think about how important uncertainty is to humans, but also to academic endeavor. And the minute that we start assuming that there is no uncertainty and that the answer has to be right because it's there written for us in black and white, is the minute we're in trouble. So blind reliance and not even noticing when something isn't great quality just because it sounds good enough, really problematic. So there's a digital literacy problem here. There's also a question around critical thought and engaging with things in a way that, again, keeps us as the creator and the consumer in control.
Yeah, fascinating. John, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I agree with everything that Laura's saying there. I would add that, if from the basic principle here, some of this is not a new problem, in that if you imagine sort of teachers in schools, if we're talking about, teachers using tools like this to prepare and deliver lessons, they might have previously then reached for pre-prepared resources and used that as the kind of, to enable sort of intellectual offloading and the reliance on that. So I think it is really important, as schools have always done, to have systems in schools for sort of checks and balances, quality assurance of teachers' effectiveness. I think there are, with the advent of this technology, there's slight sort of nuances in how this changes things. But I think that, schools can continue to use some of the systems they had in place previously to kind of guard against some of the kind of pitfalls that Laura's highlighted.
Yeah, really.
Yeah,
really
just because something looks glossy or impressive doesn't necessarily mean that its quality is good. And one of the things I've particularly noticed with early career teachers is how easily they may be fooled into thinking that an AI produced piece of work is excellent, when perhaps they don't have that foundational understanding about the principles and theories of education to see beyond the gloss.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Laura. We were literally speaking about that yesterday up in York. Maybe a teacher that's teaching out of their specialism, that's not a science teacher, picks that up. That's the reality in state schools at the moment, in all schools indeed. And they don't necessarily have the subject knowledge to be able to unpick that AI generated document and pick out the hallucinations or troublesome knowledge that's not correct. And also, if they're very new to the profession, that can be a danger as well. So I think you've hit a nerve there with many people that have said that to me, and you're on the money. And that kind of segues beautifully into our next question, which is around hallucinations. So, John, I was just going to ask you, as a content developer, how you navigate like hallucinations. First of all, I guess for those that don't know, what are hallucinations when it comes to machines? Because we know what they are in the human domain. But when it comes to machines, what are they? And kind of how do they happen, John? Like, as a computer scientist, I think people would be really interested to hear about that.
Yeah, I can explain that. I was just going to say, Alex, as well, on your last point there as well, I think the other kind of group to look at there is trainee teachers as well. If you're learning to plan lessons, how can you evaluate an AI generated lesson plan if you're still learning to plan lessons? So I think I know that there's some really kind of forward-thinking teacher training institutions around the country. We're working with a couple that are kind of exploring that and almost like looking at what's a best route into using AI in your practice, so that you are in a position to identify when it hallucinates, etc. So or inaccuracy. So just to come on to that, hallucinations, I suppose, in their simplest form, they are sort of mistakes. AI can make mistakes. It might provide a faked fact. It might misquote something. It might invent details that sound right but aren't. A phrase that I heard Professor Simon Peyton Jones use when I worked with him at CAS was that generative AI can be scarily good and confidently wrong, and that's kind of stuck with me as it kind of sums it up. The reason we get this is because large language models are trained on huge data sets, the internet, and they essentially can reproduce inaccuracies or biases in that data. And you can do some simple experiments to illustrate this. So Laura has seen me do this one, but I like to, when I'm talking to groups of teachers, I like to get ChatGPT to write me a poem about a tired teacher. And I guarantee you the teacher will be female. I've never had it produce a male teacher. And that's because the bias in the data set is that, teachers are women. Then you jump into an image generation model like DALL-E, and you get it to draw a picture of a successful company CEO. and you get something that looks like a chap out of the Gillette adverts from the 90s. That's what you give it a try. So they are there, and you know, these are inherent in building systems like this. So you can, you know, obviously do stuff to mitigate against this, and you can do that at different levels. You know, from a tech level, you can be quite strict with your prompting, really lengthy prompts. Use AI to check AI as well. That's a technique that you can use. But also, this kind of goes back to our point around the importance of the teacher in the loop as well, the importance of the teacher having that professional sign off of resources, and that teacher being adequately skilled and having the knowledge in order to be able to do that. I think there is that then sort of opens up a conversation around the additional challenges when we get into pupil facing AI platforms, quite how you monitor in real time and mitigate the risks of kind of flawed data content reaching 30 pupils accessing AI content live is a whole nother kind of level of challenge. So yeah, it's there. You can mitigate against it. You can't get rid of it in these systems entirely. So it's important that you have that oversight.
Yeah, fascinating. And Laura, we're going to get into some pretty heavy stuff now to do with safeguarding, really. And what I thought we'd do is break down these 4 phrases that you speak about in your book and just give a bit of context for teachers, because I think this will be really enlightening, because some of it, people just don't know how to look for it, how to handle it, how to react to it. So let's start with inappropriate content, Laura, like with AI. How do we help children? Because we have them in the supervised environment in school, then we have them in the unsupervised environments at home. So how do we navigate them through that part?
So I think the first thing to reflect on when we're thinking about inappropriate content is the fact that there will be lots of youngsters who are using generative AI, perhaps without realizing it, and in many cases without being supervised by adults. And their first experiences of AI may well be in completely unregulated or unsupervised spaces. So let's not assume naivety or you know, kind of inexperience. That's probably not the case. And what's also concerning to me is lots of the ways in which they will experience AI will be through things like filters, for example, in social media spaces, where you can very playfully create all sorts of fun imagery based on photographic inputs, like you take a selfie and it adds certain things. That's been in that space for a long time, but now AI is making it possible to do all sorts of challenging things, for example, which then tips into the piece we'll talk about with impersonation. But it is for that to go from cutesy, cartoony into sinister and a real cause for concern in a highly sexualized way. So I think we have to first of all be very aware that that space can be really challenging for us to help young people navigate, and a strong internal compass and a really clear idea about what to do in you know, when it comes to resilience and dealing with challenge is super important there. The second piece was around bullying and harassment. And I'm really interested in the concept of intent here. We know from like quite a long time in this sort of social media era how kind of inappropriate comments, nastiness, meanness plays out in social media spaces and gaming environments. And we've seen that for a long time. But what I think is particularly interesting is how AI can magnify the kind of malignant nastiness that happens there, where youngsters are taking an extra moment to be particularly nasty, particularly harmful and vile. And not just youngsters either, adults too, by creating content designed to hurt, upset and harm. And so let's notice that that level of sort of darkness can be magnified by AI, and that the way that intent is magnifying it by seeking to hurt people is a particular concern. The third piece I mentioned is around impersonation and predatory behaviors. And this is where I get particularly itchy about the perception of danger. If colleagues in schools are still talking as if it's the 80s with stranger danger being the biggest deal, then that frankly has no business being in education now, that messaging. Strangers are just people who aren't followers yet to the youngsters of today. And so we really need to think carefully about how to help young people recognize what concerning behaviors look like. And we need to know how easy it is for somebody, an adult, to impersonate a child, to create online identities, to appear to be something entirely other than what they are, and how easy it is to sort of disguise yourself. To then use that disguise in a predatory capacity is, again, a real cause for concern. And so it's so important that we equip youngsters with the ability to trust their gut, to notice red flags, and to think about what to do about those things. There are so many young people, like there's some terrifying data that's come out in the last month or two about how few young people have ever reported anything, anything at all online, because they are so concerned about the unknown consequences of that and the isolation that may follow. So there's a real issue there. And my final thing that I think is worth us mentioning is what I've called synthetic intimacy. There's some real challenges around the creation of trust and kind of bonded experiences between humans and AI. We know, don't we, that if our products are our thumbs and our eyeballs, and those are the things that we need to, kind of defend, companies who want our attention are going to do all they can to create an environment where we want to stay close and we want to build trust. Especially where vulnerable youngsters are concerned, but I would say all young people, we need to be particularly aware of how easy it is to manufacture and manipulate intimacy, whether that is in terms of a sort of friendly confidant or whether it's sexual. And in both of those cases, I think there's a real question around concern here, knowing how to spot it, knowing what it sounds like when young people talk about it, and knowing how far it can go. We only have to go back to the attempted assassination of Queen Elizabeth when we saw how Jaswant Singh had essentially created his own AI chatbot, and in a space of like 2,000 messages, radicalized himself to the point where he felt that assassinating the Queen was the right decision. Now, he was only 19, like he was just out of school. This is something that is very real. And so we really have to be careful about this idea of synthetic intimacy and then the really concerning directions that can travel in. And you only have to talk to your students about how they experience Snapchat's My AI to hear what they think about it. When I was talking about Snapchat's My AI to some girls in a class I was teaching last summer, and one of the girls, a bright, capable young lady, said, her face lit up, "Oh my gosh, I love her. She's my best friend." You can imagine how those she/her pronouns made my heart sink.
Yeah, fascinating. And just a couple of points there before I bring John in. For my doctorate, I'm doing research on student voice in AI, and I interviewed a bunch of students and asking them various questions. And it wasn't until I transcribed it that I noticed that the children were referring to AI as they, whereas the teachers were referring to AI as it. So they have a different relationship with this technology, and they view it almost like it's on the same level, and they trust the technology. And there was that horrendous case over in America where a 14-year-old, through synthetic intimacy, kind of built a relationship with an AI and committed suicide that's been well publicized. So this is a real danger that could potentially impact our young people in the future. And John, I just want to ask you, with your computing background, what sort of digital literacy piece can primary schools start at quite a young age to start having conversations about this with children?
Yeah, I think interesting the point that you made there about the way we talk about the AI. I know that the Raspberry Pi Foundation have done a lot of work on the kind of dangers of personifying the AI, and we want to kind of break that link. I think that schools are, under the current curriculum, are already kind of talking to their pupils about kind of critical thinking and digital discernment. And I think the advent of AI and generative AI just amplifies the need for that, the need for that kind of critical approach to consuming digital content and being aware of their digital consumption, and being, just being able to step away from things and recognizing the degree, the amount of time that pupils are actually spending using platforms like this. I mean, there shouldn't be anyway because of the age restrictions, but it's that kind of education piece on the discernment and that kind of critical thinking. So I think it's just so important now.
Okay, thank you. And we're just going to take a pause for a second and look at some policy around this, because it's one thing that we've spoken about today but haven't really spoken about. So Laura, just before we came on air, we were having a chat about policy. Just share with the audience kind of your thoughts where policy is at the moment based on what you said to me.
Sure. So I think it's a bit of a scrappy space. And there are lots of schools who took a leap relatively early, which is great, but what they now have in place may not be fit for purpose, and so probably needs a review. We should, I think, accept with peace and kind of certitude that there is no way an AI policy that you write is going to stay static and unchanged for the next 5 years. No way at all. So expecting that to be something that we treat iteratively is really important. The next thing is, I think we need to think beyond the block it, ban it, and hope it goes away approach, which I unfortunately I think is a little bit misguided and naive. And I think we need to do better for the young people that we're trying to serve. Their future has AI sewn right into the fabric of it. And for us to just assume that we can hope someone else will deal with it further down the line is going to fail them professionally and fail the nations that we are trying to build with their futures professionally too. So I think there's a real benefit to us thinking positively about it. We should not only think about what is wrong, but also what is right. It's very easy to write a policy that sort of says, they mustn't do this, they mustn't do that, but let's think about what excellence looks like in the AI-infused era and aim to be aspirational about that, while also holding the tension that says, things will go wrong. And what will we do as a school when children misuse AI? What will we do as a school when adults misuse AI? And I guarantee both of those things are already happening.
Yeah, fascinating. And John, we were chatting about different policies that are out there, because obviously it's interesting because the EU AI Act is often referenced with its tiers of risk, but obviously England specifically doesn't sit within the EU. So where should teachers look to for policy guidance?
So just to share on this one, so we've done a little bit of work on this actually, and it's all freely available. So if you don't mind me kind of sharing and plugging it a little bit. So we worked with a chap called John Sibbald up here in Manchester to put together a bit of a kind of broad AI kind of progression framework to look at your school or trust and where you're at, sort of a self-assessment piece across a number of domains, whether that's governance and sort of leadership, whether it's the kind of teacher productivity piece that TeachMate sits within, all the way through to the AI curriculum. And then we've sort of broken that down and then just written simple kind of descriptors of, where do you think you are? Are you emerging? Are you sort of along the way? Are you confident in those areas? And we're slowly then kind of building out resources under each one of those domains to support school leaders. And it's all so you can access all of this free on TeachMate just after a quick sign up. So, for example, with things like one of our strands is around appropriate transparency and explainability of what AI systems you're using in your school setting and how you communicate that to stakeholders. So we've put together resources that you can use, take, adapt, and then share with the community. But absolutely what Laura said, this is not going to be a let's do this once and then it's going to be done. This is changing all the time. So it is going to be something that you have to keep coming back to. Amazing.
Guys, we've covered so much ground today in terms of the topics, the ideas, and I've learned a great deal from listening to you both with your insights and your extensive experience. So I just want to, on behalf of STEM Learning and all the audience members and teachers and leaders out there, thank you so much for joining us. Just going to speak very quickly for about 90 seconds about what's coming around the corner in terms of the AI sprints. The next episode is in June. I believe it's the 2nd of June, and we've got Al Kingsley, who's just got an MBE, coming on with Bucky Youssef. And interesting, we spoke today a little bit about diversification and biases. We didn't go into a lot of details, but it was mentioned. That's going to be a big focus of the next session. We're going to dive into, well, how do children see themselves represented in AI models? Where does the training take place? How do the biases manifest? And we're going to dive into that in quite a bit of detail in the next session. So if that's of interest to you, please join us live. All of these sessions are recorded, and as of tomorrow, this one will be available on the STEM Learning community. So you have to be a community member to join and access those. But we know that many of you, we've seen the statistics, the analytics are really impressive. Lots of you are engaging with those post-event. You're using them for your CPD and you're finding it useful, and that's the whole aim of these sprints. We are talking about season 2. We've got lots of you who've reached out saying, is it going to happen? We will let you know, but it's great that you're excited for it. And just to say, STEM Learning is an organization. We run a couple of AI courses that you'd be interested in. John is actually coming to Keynote in York on the 27th of June, aren't you, John? You're going to be there for the AI Digital Conference. Yeah, so we're looking forward to hearing you speak alongside Darren Coxon, who we obviously had on episode 1 of AI Sprints. Unlocking AI is an incredibly popular course, and actually in less than 60 seconds, I'm coming off this call to go and run that, because we've got 22 people that are currently in that session. So if you really want to get into depth in some of the stuff we're doing, dive into Unlocking AI, you can book that on the STEM Learning website. And we also have a 1-hour webinar for everyone who just is kind of scratching the surface and wanting to look at different platforms. So on behalf of all of us, thank you so much. It's been really enlightening. You two have been awesome. Thanks for giving up your time, and I've learned a great deal from you both. And thank you so much. Everybody have a safe evening wherever you're joining us from in the world, and we will see you very soon for episode 4. Really excited. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.